Today we're taking a deep dive into all the talks surrounding possible peace talks in Ukraine.
Right.
And trust me, it's not just those two countries involved.
Yeah, no, this has global implications. It really
We're
is.
talking alliances
Absolutely.
and financial markets. I mean, everything is getting touched by this.
It really is fascinating to watch it all unfold.
And the reactions are all over the place, right?
Yeah, you've got some people who are optimistic,
Uh-huh.
and you have others who are extremely skeptical.
So we've got a whole pile of sources to get through here. News articles, expert opinions.
Oh, yeah.
We even have some official statements. And they seem to be contradicting each other.
Oh, absolutely.
So our mission with this deep dive is to give you a clear breakdown of what's actually happening
Right.
and what it means for the world as we know it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the key here.
So where do we even begin?
Well, I think the most interesting thing is how the U.S. is really taking the lead.
Okay.
With President Trump initiating that direct contact with President Putin.
Yeah, the goal being obviously a peace deal.
Right, to end the conflict in Ukraine.
And that's where things start to get a little tricky.
Oh, yeah.
Because European leaders were not happy about being left out
No, not at all.
of
Especially
the loop.
because, well, early reports even suggested that Ukraine might be excluded
Right.
from these talks. So I think you can understand their concerns.
Absolutely.
You know, leaving key players out of such delicate negotiations could definitely cause problems down the road.
Yeah.
And these talks are supposed to happen in Saudi Arabia,
Interesting.
which again just adds another layer of intrigue to the whole situation.
Right. And, even though Trump has since clarified that Zelensky will be involved,
Yeah.
that initial, misstep definitely caused some concern
Yeah.
in Europe.
Absolutely. So now the question on everybody's mind is, what does Europe do?
Exactly. What do they do now?
What's their next move?
Well, judge it by their reactions. They're not just going to sit back and do nothing.
Oh, no, they're not going to be quiet.
You've got Macron. He's called for that emergency summit
Uh-huh.
in Paris,
Yep.
essentially for all the European leaders to figure out how to respond.
They need to coordinate their response to Trump's rather bold move.
Yeah, and I think it's safe to say there's some unease in Europe,
Oh, absolutely.
almost like a feeling of betrayal.
Yeah, I think betrayal is a strong word, but there's definitely a sense of, being let down.
Yeah, and it's not just talk.
No, it's not just rhetoric.
You've got statements like from the UK Prime Minister saying that he's willing to send troops
Wow.
to Ukraine.
As part of a peacekeeping force? That's a pretty significant statement.
It is, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
I mean, that really underscores just how anxious Europe is right now
Yeah, there's this growing sentiment that the U.S. might be stepping back.
from its security commitments
Exactly. And if that's true, the implications are massive.
for NATO and really the entire, transatlantic partnership.
Oh, absolutely. The whole dynamic could shift.
So Europe's on edge, which makes sense.
Right.
But what about Zelensky?
Yeah, how does he fit into all of this?
He's not exactly known for backing down.
No, Zelensky is a strong leader.
From what we're seeing, he's making it clear Ukraine is not going to just sit on the sidelines.
Yeah, he's not going to be a passive bystander in these negotiations.
He's basically saying, if you want to talk peace, we need to be at the table.
Exactly. He's drawing a line in the sand.
Yeah, and he's rejected any deal negotiated without Ukraine's direct involvement.
Right, and he's been very vocal about that. He even rejected that U.S. proposal about the mineral resources.
Oh, wow, the one that would have given up half of Ukraine's mineral resources?
Yeah, in exchange for continued U.S. support.
Wow, that's a huge deal.
Yeah, he basically deemed it unfavorable to Ukrainian interests.
Makes sense?
I mean, a deal like that raises some serious red flags.
Yeah, about exploitation and the need for some really strong security guarantees.
Absolutely. It seems like Zelensky is fighting for a peace
Uh-huh.
that protects Ukraine's sovereignty and their future.
So he's thinking long term.
Oh, absolutely. He's playing the long game.
And then there's that prediction he made
Right.
that Putin might set his sights on another country
Yeah, once the situation in Ukraine is resolved.
in Europe. I mean, that's a chilling thought,
It is. It's something that European leaders are definitely taking very seriously.
I bet.
As they should. This goes way beyond just the immediate conflict.
Yeah.
It raises questions about the stability of the entire region.
Right. Okay, so we've got the U.S. kind of making this bold move. Europe's not happy,
Right.
feeling sidelined,
Yeah.
and Zelensky's holding his ground.
Yeah, he's not backing down.
So what are the broader economic and geopolitical consequences of all this?
Well, this is where things get really interesting. I think we should start with that U.S.-Ukraine minerals deal.
Okay?
Even though it's off the table for now, it raises some big questions.
Like what?
About who controls resources, who benefits from them,
Uh-huh.
and the long-term strategic implications. This is something that's being talked about,
Yeah.
not just in government circles, but also in boardrooms around the world.
Right. And what about the financial markets? I mean, we've seen the Russian ruble surge recently,
Uh-huh.
and markets seem to be anticipating an end to the war.
It's a reminder of how much influence these conflicts have.
Yeah.
and potential peace has on the global economy. It also shows how interconnected everything is.
Oh, for sure.
Even a localized conflict like this one can really send shockwaves through the international markets.
Absolutely. And what if the U.S. really is shifting its focus away from Europe?
Right.
What does that mean for NATO?
Yeah.
Could we see, like, entirely new alliances
That's a real possibility.
emerging?
I mean, the world is in constant flux.
Yeah.
Old assumptions are being challenged every single day. Countries are having to reassess
Yeah.
their interests, their allegiances, and that can lead to some really unpredictable outcomes.
It's almost like watching the tectonic plates shift, but in geopolitics.
It's a really apt analogy.
What would you say is the most significant development so far?
For me, it's this potential decoupling of the U.S. and Europe. I mean, this transatlantic alliance has been a cornerstone
Yeah.
for decades, but now we're really starting to see these cracks.
Yeah.
If the U.S. truly pulls back from Europe,
Yeah.
it's uncharted territory.
Uncharted territory.
And that's a risky proposition for everybody involved.
And risky for the entire world.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's almost like we're seeing a Cold War sequel,
Yeah.
but the lines are all blurred.
Yeah. The players are way less predictable.
The stakes are even higher.
And the stakes are incredibly high. I mean, we're talking about a potential reshaping of the global order.
Yeah.
And that comes with a whole lot of uncertainty
Yeah.
and the possibility of new conflicts.
Let's talk about Zelensky for a second.
Okay.
I mean, he seems determined to make sure Ukraine's interests are protected.
Yeah.
But is he walking a tightrope here?
He's in an incredibly difficult position.
Yeah.
He needs the support of the U.S.
Uh-huh.
and its allies, but he can't be seen as a puppet
Right.
of any foreign power. It's a delicate balancing act, asserting Ukraine's sovereignty,
Right.
while also being pragmatic about needing international assistance.
Yeah, and he's got to be super careful
Oh, yeah.
about Putin's intentions.
Well, yeah, this is the same leader who annexed Crimea.
Right, back in 2014.
And he's shown that he's willing to use military force
Exactly.
to achieve his objectives.
Yeah, trust is hard to come by,
Especially in international relations.
especially when you're dealing with Putin.
You've got to be cautious, strategic,
Yeah.
and really ready for anything. Zelensky is essentially playing a very high-stakes game
Uh-huh.
of poker
Yeah.
with a global superpower, and the chips are the future of his country.
No pressure, right?
No pressure at all.
Okay, so let's think about the bigger picture for a second.
Okay.
Global peace and security. If these peace talks actually happen,
Right.
could this set a precedent
That's the million-dollar question.
for how future conflicts are resolved?
The danger here is that if the U.S. rushes into a deal,
Uh-huh.
that prioritizes their interests
Okay.
over the interests of its allies
Yeah.
and Ukraine.
Yeah.
It sends a message that might makes right, and that international law is optional,
Right.
and that could embolden other aggressors around the world.
Yeah, so it's not just about ending this one conflict.
No.
It's about the unintended consequences.
Exactly. The ripple effects.
The ripple effects.
Yeah, this could lead to more instability.
Down the road.
Absolutely. We could see a resurgence of authoritarianism, a decline in the rule of law,
Right.
and ultimately more conflict.
And more suffering.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the people of Ukraine.
Okay.
What does all of this mean for their future?
It's really hard to say.
Yeah.
A lot depends on what happens with these peace talks, if they even happen at all.
Right.
The best case scenario is a peace agreement that respects Ukraine's territorial integrity,
Uh-huh.
provides strong security guarantees,
Yeah.
and really addresses the root causes of the conflict.
But that's a tall order.
It is a tall order.
And even if they manage to reach a deal, there's no guarantee it'll hold.
No.
I mean, we've seen this before. Peace agreements fall apart.
Yeah, especially when one side feels like they were forced into it.
Exactly.
Lasting peace takes more than just signatures on a document.
Yeah.
It requires a shift in attitudes, a commitment to open dialogue,
Uh-huh.
and a real effort towards reconciliation. And that's often the hardest part.
So we're not just talking about, ending the fighting.
No.
We're talking about fixing the issues that caused this whole thing in the first place.
We're talking about the historical grievances, the political divisions, the economic inequalities,
Yeah.
and of course that struggle for power and influence. These all need to be part of the conversation.
Real peace is about, building bridges, fostering trust,
Right.
and creating a future where everyone feels like they're being heard.
Exactly, where their interests are being considered and respected. It's a long and complex process.
Yeah.
It takes patience, compromise,
Right.
and a willingness to understand the other side.
Okay, let's play devil's advocate for a second.
Okay?
Some might say the U.S. is just trying to be a peacemaker,
Right.
trying to end a conflict that's dragging on,
Yeah.
costing lives and resources.
That's certainly one way to look at it. But the problem is that this approach
Mm-hmm.
could be seen as a betrayal,
by U.S. allies.
yeah, by their allies, and as a sign of weakness by their adversaries.
Which could lead to more conflict down the road.
Absolutely. International relations are full of unintended consequences.
Yeah.
And the U.S. has to be very careful about how it's perceived.
On the world stage.
Exactly.
So as this situation develops, what are the key things we should be watching for?
Well, first of all, who's actually at the negotiating table?
Right.
Will Ukraine and European nations have a real seat at the table?
Or will they be sidelined?
Yeah, because we saw how their initial exclusion went down.
Not well.
Not well at all.
Not well at all.
Second, we need to look for signs of compromise.
Uh-huh.
From all sides. I mean, no peace agreement is perfect.
Right.
And everyone involved is probably going to have to give something up.
To reach a lasting solution.
Exactly.
And that's got to be tough.
It is, especially for Ukraine.
Especially for Ukraine. They've been through so much already.
They have. And the third thing to watch for are the security guarantees that are offered to Ukraine.
Yeah.
If those guarantees are weak or unenforceable, it leaves Ukraine vulnerable to future aggression.
It's like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound.
That's a great analogy, a temporary fix that doesn't address the underlying problem.
Exactly.
And finally, we need to pay attention to the international community.
Yeah.
Will they support this peace agreement, or will they see it as a power grab?
By the U.S. and Russia.
Exactly, because if the agreement isn't seen as legitimate and fair, it's unlikely to hold.
It needs that international support.
It does.
We've covered a lot.
We have.
But there's so much more to discuss. What about China's role in all of this?
Oh, China's a big question mark in all of this. I mean, they've got their own interests in the region.
Yep.
And they've been getting more assertive on the world stage, so their reaction to all of this is definitely something to watch.
Yeah, definitely. It adds a whole other layer of complexity to an already complex situation.
Absolutely.
And, with all this focus on geopolitics, it's easy to forget about the human cost.
Yeah, absolutely.
Millions of Ukrainians have been displaced.
Right.
I mean, the war has been devastating for their infrastructure, their economy.
It's a tragedy. There's no other way to put it. And even if they reach a peace agreement, it could take Ukraine generations to recover.
Yeah.
And that's assuming everyone is committed to peace.
Which is a big if.
Yeah, a big if.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the key takeaways you want our listeners to remember?
Well, I think the main takeaway is that this whole situation with these peace talks is incredibly fluid and complex. There are so many players involved, each with their own goals. It's like a giant game of Risk, but with real-world consequences.
Exactly. And the U.S. effort to broker a deal, it's generated hope, but also a lot of anxiety.
It has.
European nations are worried about being left out. Zelensky's making sure Ukraine has a voice.
Right.
And the potential consequences are huge. Not just for Ukraine, but for the whole world.
Absolutely. I could see alliances shift, the global economy take a hit.
Yeah.
Even the way we resolve conflicts in the future could be impacted.
It's like the butterfly effect, but on a global scale.
It really is. It just goes to show how interconnected everything is.
So where do we go from here? What's the next chapter?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? We're in uncharted territory. The path forward is uncertain.
It's like we're watching a movie and the ending hasn't been written yet.
Exactly. The coming weeks and months are going to be crucial.
Okay, time for the big finish. Given everything we've discussed, what's one thought-provoking question you want to leave our listeners with?
Here's something to think about. Given how much the U.S. seems to want a quick resolution, and with all these potential shifts in alliances, could their pursuit of peace in Ukraine actually create the conditions for more conflicts to break out somewhere else in Europe?
Now that's something to ponder. We've looked at the facts, we've explored the context, and we've examined all the different perspectives surrounding this incredibly dynamic situation. Now it's your turn to connect the dots, draw your own conclusions, and stay tuned as this story continues to unfold. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.